that is happening at such a fast pace that we can compare it to the concept that has been coined digital Darwinism, where the rate of change is always increasing faster and faster, and individuals and systems are either going to find ways to adapt or they're going to die out. So, these are just examples to show what maybe is getting people to feel as though they are being left behind. We've spoken about austerity very much over the past days, and also about migration. But it's not only austerity and migration. I think that there is another big issue that we need to address. For several years, the dominant narrative that we have listened to is that only things that have monetary value have any value at all. This narrative is being challenged, but we have to challenge it, and we have to challenge it in the right way. Because what is happening is that the narrative has been taken out of our hands and is being used by people in order to advance their own political gains. When I say we need to challenge the narrative, we need to put relationships and well-being of individuals within society at the forefront, if we really want to build a new social pillar for Europe as is being proposed. So, what my plea is that we need a new narrative also for us as a public health community. Because what worked in a post-war Europe to guarantee peace and human development is unlikely to work today. But what some groups are trying to do is to convince people to hanker nostalgically back to this blissful and rose-tinted era. And it's up to us to find a narrative, and if necessary also a rhetoric, something that will capture the public's imagination and get them to successfully engage in their own health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, for your opening. I want you to say that we're going to ask you to ask us questions and comments on what's being said. We have 4 more statements that will take about half an hour, and after that we're going right into a discussion. So don't lean back and think that you don't have an active part anymore. You will be in the session too. We heard something about migration, and we want to have a deeper look into the topic of migration now. And the one who's going to give us this deeper insight is Alan Kresnik. He is Professor of Health Services Research at the University of Copenhagen. He is also a medical doctor and the president of the Migrant and Ethnic Minority Health Section of the UFA. Alan, please.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to UFA for organizing this, for the conference organizers to organize this session, even on a Saturday afternoon on such an important issue. Could I ask for my slides, please? I think they are put on by the technical... No, I have to do that on my own. Ah, it is there. All right, thank you very much. Health for all for health. What does that really mean? All, who are included in this concept of all? If we look at the Human Rights Declaration, it's clear that this is a declaration including health rights that covers all human beings. Not only citizens, as many governments believe, but all human beings, including all kinds of migrants and ethnic minorities, independent of their formal status in the country. And this means if you focus on migrants, you have to realize that they have a life trajectory which is very influential to their health. There are conditions in their country of origin, factors leading to their migration, processes of migration with hardships in the travel, post-migration factors, arriving to a destination country and being discriminated or not giving full rights. All this has to be included in a life course perspective where all these factors are taken into account and included in the assessment of needs and in the initiatives to cope with the health problems. Migrants, to be a migrant has relation to the kind of health that you experience. But to be a migrant also often implies that you are an ethnic minority. An ethnic minority that also has effects on health. And being a migrant also has effects on your social situation, and there are social determinants which influence your health. And the interaction between these different dimensions of life has to be taken into account. It has to be done in an intersectional approach in order to cope with the problems. So here, the slogan of all for health really makes sense. And if we look at the situation in different countries, how are migrants received health-wise, we find very different policies, very different practices, and they differ across countries, but they also differ according to formal status, according to location, according to the numbers arriving. And it's not only an issue of how you deal with the migrants when they arrive. This is a long-term issue that you have to take into account. And we know from evidence, from research, that there are many formal factors, but also informal factors that serve as barriers to qualified health interventions. And they lead to delay in diagnosis and treatment, low quality of services, and at the end, sometimes increased morbidity and mortality. Is that health for all? Let's see what the countries then are doing. The recent migrant policy index has included health policies across 38 countries, including all the European countries. And there are actually, in many of those countries, action plans for dealing with migrant health. But if you look closer, unfortunately, they are rarely involving measures to implement the plans, or rarely involving migrant health stakeholders. So, health for all? Well, what should the plans and programs include? Well, they should really focus on the whole series of factors determining health among migrants and ethnic minorities. They also focus on downstream issues like health behavior, disease intervention if they are ambitious, but rarely on the issues that are more upstream, right up to what creates migration, war and hunger, poverty, etc. in their home countries. So there are lots of issues that should be involved in improving the health and the situation of migrants. Fortunately, the UN, the assembly of all our home countries, met in a special session in September in New York and decided to commit themselves, all of our countries, to the rights of the migrants, to including health rights. There is a commitment. So now go home to your home countries. Tell them that they have committed themselves, and tell them the following. Tell them that migration is an essential and an unavoidable dimension of human history. Without migration, many of us will not be here at all. It is benefiting mankind. Tell them that the present so-called migration crisis in Europe is mainly a political crisis created by politicians and could be solved by politicians if they wish to do so. They have committed themselves in principle. Tell them that the important focus on social integration is not sufficient. There are links between social and health, and it has to be approached as a combined issue. It has to be dealt with. Tell them that better migrant health policies are clearly motivated by several arguments. First of all, the human rights and equity goals, but also issues of integration, which have priorities in many countries, and finally the economic argument that, that it is worth its value for money to invest early in the process of migration, and if you don't do it, it will be punished in economic terms later on. So, finally, tell them that migrant health has fruitful lessons for public health in general. The whole society will benefit if you really succeed in coping with migrant health issues. So, at the end, we need to make the migrants visible. We need to respect their rights, get them out of the fog, and ensure that we are not only talking about human rights principles, but also about human rights policies and human rights practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, for your advice. We're going to have presidential elections in 4 weeks, and we will see how the Austrian people will think about the benefits of migration. Teodora Krumova, she is a Roma activist coming from Bulgaria, and she has probably a different perspective on migration. She is an evaluation expert for applying the model of social accountability and community monitoring of healthcare services, and she is the program director of the Center Amolit, and today she's speaking on behalf of the Open Society Foundation. Teodora, what is your perspective on migration?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. While preparing for this presentation, somehow all the time to my mind was coming again and again a song. Some of you might have heard it. It's by Metallica. It's called "Injustice for All." Metallica sang this song 30 years ago, provoking the society that we need justice for all, including excluded people. And somehow, for me, it has already been linked. It always has been linked with the issue of health, because without health for all, we cannot achieve justice for all. And so I want to provoke you as well to think from a different perspective about health for all, including excluded people. Usually the conservative understanding of health puts into this proportion quality of health and access to health care. However, the modern European concept of health care should promote high-quality healthcare services that should reach all people. This means health for all. In order to put in place for this concept, all EU member states should find a mechanism to reduce health inequalities among the key disadvantaged groups, which means people in rural areas, minorities, including Roma, because this is the biggest European minority, increasing and migrants and refugees, of course. This concept, however, could not be applied without having the two sides in this process. Activities and efforts from within the communities, and activities and efforts from outside the communities, involving all stakeholders, policymakers, civil society, practitioners, academics, etc., and all of them should act as equal partners. For a couple of years, Open Society Foundation has been supporting several non-governmental organizations organizations, mainly in the Balkans, in Bulgaria, Macedonia, and Romania, to implement an initiative called Community Monitoring and Social Accountability on Health for Roma People. This initiative drives the attention towards its comprehensive mechanism to activate both communities and stakeholders from outside. Community mobilization and empowerment leads to improving health situation of Roma, especially among Romani women through several aspects. First, it's raising awareness about health issues, rights and obligations in the field of healthcare. Second, improving access to healthcare, increasing the quality of healthcare services, and overcoming harmful traditional practices. And since I know that policymakers often love figures, I will not bother you with many figures. I just put several numbers here. Just to show you, the first column is the communities where this method has been already implemented for a couple of years. And you see there that the awareness, the quality of the healthcare services is much higher. The illegal payments are almost minimum. So this shows that this method involving communities, making them active, it works. But since I'm not a politician and I don't like figures so much, I know that sometimes for us, the personal stories are more important. And I know that behind all these figures, we should put human faces. So that's why I just wanted to provoke you, asking you to look at this girl and also to look at the pictures of another girl and think what are the similarities and the differences between these two girls. Probably everyone would make a guess for himself or for herself. In fact, the similarities are much more between the girls. They are from the same communities. They have been, both of them have been married at the age of 14. They have been excluded from access to healthcare. However, there is one big difference. The girl on the first picture just stayed at this level. She's called Asya, and she's still that small girl. The other girl, she's called Temenushka, and now she has already graduated her school. She went to university, now she's in her first year in the university. She studies social services and she's working as community moderator. The big difference is that somebody believed in her, somebody helped her to believe in herself and helped her to become a marker of change. So she is an agent of change for her communities, for her community and for the other communities. She's the active part of the communities, those people that we need to involve in all these policies. So initiatives like community monitoring, unfortunately so far are just initiatives by private donors and NGOs. What we need, however, is that these initiatives that have proved to be working to be further taken over by policymakers, decision makers, and become an integral element of all EU policies for reducing health inequalities among the most marginalized communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Teodora, for this interesting presentation. As I said at the beginning, we'll be talking about migration, austerity, and the need for change. It's time to go to the austerity part, and who could be talking about it, who would be better to talk about it than David Stuckler. David Stuckler is Professor of Political Economics and Sociology at the University of Oxford. As he told us yesterday, by origin he is coming from Texas, US, and he gave us a very interesting analysis of the US presidential elections earlier this week. He's also a research fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and author of numerous articles and books.
Jürgen, thank you, and good afternoon. I threw out slides because I want to really reflect here on two things I've seen for the first time at UFA that has really struck me. And one those of you who were in the room yesterday at our late breaker session on the election of Donald Trump, you would have felt the energy, the enthusiasm, the shared concern of the threats to public health we face and we share. There's a level of commitment to rolling up our sleeves and engaging not just with the evidence, but getting into the thick of the political fray. And that's a lesson we've learned from our work on austerity. That austerity has been an inequality-producing machine, it's damaged people's health, and has generated political instability, all of which are the consequences our sessions have been dealing with. In the migration crisis, migration hasn't changed to a great extent in this period. What's happened is the witch hunts, the push to the far right that have turned migration into a political crisis. And all these react back, threatening the solvency of the EU and our collective future. So we have to get political, and what struck me here in UFA is there was a willingness to roll up our sleeves and go the distance. And the second thing that I noticed that really struck me, it's a completely different topic, has to do with dating. As I walked into the last session today with Gavin Galea and Teodora, at the back of the room, someone was on their phone using Tinder. I don't know if you know about this. It's an online dating app where people will try to meet others for dating who they don't know from the virtual sphere. And if we're going to get political and get out of our comfort zone, I think we need to think about dating. Now, not in this sense, but let me first ask you a question you may have heard. How many of you have been in touch with a local member of parliament in, say, the past 2 months? Just show hands. So that's pretty good. We got about a third of the room. How many of you have the phone number on your phone of a local member of parliament? Smaller number, about a sixth. So my challenge to you is, if people are willing to meet others through online dating who they don't know, I want to see as many of you as possible when we come back next year to pick up a phone number of a politician. Because this is political, but it's also personal. And somebody said something to me that was very striking, and it came in the debate on austerity. We've heard that Greece is not Spain, Spain is not Ireland, Ireland is not the UK, and it really touched me. Actually, 3 people came up to me after that session on Trump and said, "We are all Americans now." I know that may not be music to your ears, but you know. But as European public health, we are all Greeks now. We are all Brits now. We are all Irish now, and we stand in solidarity. What I want to see happen is a spark of a global health movement. Michael Moore right here, who better next, to take us forward. I want to see UFA. The challenge for you is to get the number. The challenge for us is to create that Tinder online platform to help make it happen. I want to see Richard Horton's suggestion about a scorecard so that we're armed, ready to go when new governments come in, what our asks are, and we're ready to hold them accountable. And if not, we're going to pick up the phone and call them on Friday nights. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You will have to come back to Stockholm next year and evaluate if the participants of this conference all have numbers of a politician on their mobile. I wonder what Michael has to say about that, because he used to be the Minister of Health and Community Care in Australia. Today he is the CEO of the Public Health Association of Australia and President of the World Federation of Public Health Associations. Would you like to give your phone number to the audience?
What I have done when I was a politician is a different question. And David, I am so impressed that you can recognise on somebody's phone what a Tinder app actually is. I come from Australia, and therefore I'm one of 97% of Australians who are not migrants. I personally live on the land of the Ngunnawal people. And as the Ngunnawal people, that I'd like to take this opportunity to express my respect for their elders, past and present, to the same for all Indigenous communities in Australia and for all Indigenous communities internationally. When we try and work out what's the most effective way to deal with health, the World Federation of Public Health Associations, at the request of Margaret Chan, developed a horizontal approach to health, and it followed really from the Declaration of Alma Ata, the Ottawa Charter, and the Millennium Development Goals, and it's to be read in conjunction with the Sustainable Development Goals. You can find this charter on the website of the World Federation of Public Health Associations. We see each of those as a horizontal approach. When Margaret Chan approached us, the thinking, and this is my language, was that we'd had a horizontal approach with regard to Alma Ata, with regard to Ottawa Charter, and then we went vertical. We were looking at AIDS, we were looking at diabetes, we were looking at cardiovascular disease, and it's time for us to frame again the way we think about health, but now in a global context, because the global context does make a significant difference. And so the Global Charter, in a nutshell, has 7 areas of action. It has the 4 services that will be somewhat self-evident to most people here: protection, prevention, promotion. But actually, more importantly, in some ways, are the enablers. And the enablers are about governance, they're about information, they're about advocacy, and they're about capacity building. But today I want to focus particularly just on the issue of advocacy, because we often hear people talking about advocacy, and very few people talk about how you go about it. And so I'm going to share with you 10 steps that I have considered appropriate for conducting advocacy. And these steps are effective for planning advocacy or for evaluating advocacy. And so the first step is making sure you understand a sense of urgency. So when David's talking about what's happening with Donald Trump, well, if we put off Richard Horton's idea and get around to it, and we share it very carefully, and we circulate it amongst our colleagues, then we send it to over 100 public health associations around the world, and we bring it back to us, and we finally get to it in June or July next year, or maybe present it again at UFA for consideration, we've lost it. There's no sense of urgency. We have a sense of urgency now, and that's what David was presenting. But we can't do it on our own. You do not do advocacy on your own. The first and most fundamental, or the second step that we do, is make sure that we have a guiding coalition. So when I heard Natasha talking about UFA working with the World Federation, working with the American Public Health Association, and so on, this is how you develop a guiding coalition. The third step, and one of the most important steps, is developing and maintaining influential relationships. That's why it is that we hopefully have not only the ministers, not just the politicians, but the ministers' phone number on our phone, but some actually have their mobile phone numbers. And that's important. By the way, it's not important necessarily to talk to the politicians, the minister. You actually mostly get most effect talking to their chief of staff. Remember, the minister, and I was one of these, is the show pony. Everybody else does the work, and then you dance around the stadium and get the prize. You must understand the change vision, and you have to develop that change vision. And this, in advocacy steps, is where the academics come in particular. If that change vision is not based on sound evidence, and therefore developed into good policy, the system will fail. It's a critical part, but it's a critical part that is one of 10 steps. So when I hear academics talking about research translation and so forth, often they're thinking there's just one other step. This is part of a broad process. And once you've got that vision, then you have to find a way to communicate that vision for buy-in. So how many people have Twitter on their phone? How many people have Facebook? You know, this is how we communicate in modern times. Of course, we use media releases, but I would never put out a media release if it's not put on Facebook, if it's not also shared by Twitter. And then, of course, what we want to do is get the movement going. And that's actually what David talked about. That's how he wants to involve you. What we want is to empower broad-based action, to have things that people can actually do. And one of the most interesting ones in effective advocacy is being opportunistic. You just have to be aware. Often that opportunistic comes out of things that are not so nice. So a baby dies, and perhaps the cause is poor nutrition. And we use that as an example to say, actually, we need to do a lot more work in making sure the conditions of nutrition are there and that we don't listen to the people who advocate paleo diets for babies. Politicians, everybody says, oh, they're only thinking about the next election. Actually, I don't think I ever met a politician who told me they're only thinking about the next election. Every politician I met wanted to be seen as a visionary, and one or two of them actually were. The issue, though, is that they have to have something to take to the next election. So often we can make sure that there are outputs, is what I would call them, rather than the outcome, that can be delivered as quickly as possible. Persistence is fundamental to what we do in public health. How many times do we get a public health issue that we deliver in 2 or 3 years? It's very, very rare. In Australia, we've been very, very successful with plain packaging of tobacco. But we've been working 50 years on trying to reduce the use of tobacco in our society. And finally, step 10, once we've got our changes, how do we incorporate them into the society? How do they become part and parcel of our society? And the machine won't go anymore. There we go. And I just point out that this is modified from change management theory, because actually what we do with advocacy is change management theory. And finally, I would like to just use this quick opportunity to extend an invitation, because the World Congress on Public Health is in Melbourne in April, and I know many of you are already coming. If you don't have your name down, here's an invitation. Please join us for that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. Could you please show slide number 3 of Michael's presentation, the one before the invitation, with the 10 steps, because I think we will come back to the 10 steps. There was step number 2, guiding coalitions. That reminds me of something we discussed earlier this year at the Health Forum in Gastein. Natasha was there as well, in a very interesting session about pharmaceutical prices, when Elias Mosialos came up with the assumption that the 27 EU member states should negotiate pharmaceutical prices together. That would be a very powerful guiding coalition. So this is the moment when you come in. We have approximately another 15 minutes for discussion, for your questions and comments. I don't see any hands. Raise your hands. Who has a comment? Who has a question? Don't be shy. I announced that you will be active this afternoon. And by the way, I want you to stay. Don't start leaving now, because at the end of this discussion we will also have a closing ceremony. So you're not allowed to leave now. I still see no hands. Come on. Yeah, and the far back, one brave guy.
I'm Tommy from UCL. In light of the recent changes with Brexit and Trump and things like that, should we also be re-evaluating the tactics we're using, not just the strategy and the passion, but the actual tactics of how we communicate with the public, not with policymakers, but public releases? Perhaps 5 years ago it would have been more appropriate to be cautious and balanced and be aware very explicitly of the grey areas and the uncertainties. But maybe maybe now is the time, I'm not sure, I'm really not sure, we should take a very small, careful step to being a bit more black and white and a bit more explicit. Maybe even going to more tabloid readers and yellow readership audiences, because maybe we restrict our communication to a minority of the population, and that's probably not helpful. What do you think about that?
Is the red one on? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I couldn't agree with you more, that I think in this situation that is evolving, perhaps more than targeting our communication directly to the politicians and asking for the numbers and everything. I've got a whole stack, by the way. Do I have enough price, David? You can find them on my mobile phone. But I think the real challenge is to find ways of really getting the public gripped with what we are saying, because they themselves then will present the critical mass that get politicians perhaps to become galvanized into action. And I think we need to be a bit more creative about how we engage the fantasy of the public, that after all we are really there trying to promote everyone's well-being and not our own.
Well, we are talking a lot about how to communicate with national politicians and now the general public. And that reminds me of the slogan from the climate and ecological issues: think globally, act locally. And I think during this conference we have heard many examples of local community actions, initiatives, collaboration with different action groups, which really change the situation and might even be reflected further on a national scale. But acting locally with those we are talking about is a solution that might be easier to start with than convincing our Donald Trumps and others that are resistant to our arguments.
So one of the big lessons from Brexit and I think Trump elections is that in emotions versus data, emotion wins. We're taught to be dispassionate epidemiologists and neutrally present our findings. And I'd say not only do we have to be actively neutral, but try to communicate our studies with a narrative, as Natasha points out. But try, and the challenge for us all again, is when you do your studies, not just describe how you think about them, but when communicating with the public, how you feel about them. It's something I struggle with, but when successful, in my experience, it does much better in getting the message across.
I want just to add something to what the colleague said, because I completely agree that emotion now becomes more important than facts for the general public. That's why I think one of the successful methods, at least in our work, that we have used is the personal stories. That's why I tried to show you a face, because for the people, a face means more than figures. And when you see a face, then you stop to see the migrants or the minorities or the refugees as a general event, something big, general, but you see the faces there. So I think the personal stories are easy to touch emotionally the general public, and this should make us really consider our advocacy strategies also, because we should really pay more attention to what the general public thinks.
Just to support Teodora, having spent 3.5 years as a health minister and probably knocked back, rejected 3 or 4 very good ideas every week, because there are many other factors that had to do with political parties, had to do with money, had to do with a range of other things. The ones that work are those where there is the evidence, and when there is the personal story, and where there's a proper slogan. And remember that there is also the enemy. I've done a huge amount of work around the issues of food and nutrition. And yet, when we actually get close, so regularly somebody says, oh, just nanny state. And those 2 words, nanny state, seriously undermine the work we do. So we have to find similar sorts of words. So although I've published many times in peer-reviewed journals, that's terrific, as a politician, you never talk like that. You make it in short, sharp ideas that are best described as a grab, 4 or 5 seconds. At the longest, the elevator pitch. That's actually what we get. That's how we need to communicate. But to do it, we've got to have the evidence that underpins it. The evidence that underpins it is still fundamental. The evidence, the story, then the grab.
There's a comment or question over here, Franz, Teodora.
We have taken a very interesting development. Now we have a political discussion and a technical discussion. But I agree, we have to get first the analysis and the evidence right. And about the analysis, what happened in the United States, what happens in austerity, there are others where we should look for it. There are other movements, and I think it's not only about creating 1,000 guiding coalitions, it's also joining a coalition and building bridges with those. And there are movements like DiEM25 of Yanis Varoufakis, which address exactly what should be needed rationally. And I don't agree with a lot which is spoken on the panel to use more emotions, that's propaganda. And I think our role is not to be better in propaganda. Our role is here mostly to create a good evidence base, and then for the most talented perhaps to sell it or become minister. But actually there we have to be humble and look for the coalitions where our values are put forward. And I think the 10 steps up there could be really a problematic way forward.
And do remember, I'll be very brief, and do remember that it's actually developing the change vision. That's actually where evidence lies. And yet there's all this other work that has to be done that's beyond that. And lots of the other work can be done by academics. But there are many, many people involved in so many ways in public health that also are involved in the other steps. And you know, Teodora is a great example of using those stories of being opportunistic, of being determined but never letting up.
Any other comments? There was a question there on the back, thanks.
Thank you for giving this chance for the questions and everything. Firstly, I would like to share maybe an experience by my country. I'm coming from Turkey, and in sometimes when we talk to the advocacy, maybe I see sometimes we have to skip the most important part, like the parliamentarians, because it's much more difficult to collaborate, but much more local advisors or the people can do much more active things. And I was just wondering about my question mark is, I'm a little bit struggling about being actively in field, doing academic research and doing a paper, because sometimes it can't be in the same time. And much more, I experience here some of the presentations like people doing interventions, but probably they are not really able to publish or present them there really well. But really good actions, but to arrive at is really difficult because there's a really good academicians presenting, but it's not in the same level. And I was just question mark how we can do this combining these two things, because it's a public action, maybe sometimes really in the field, and maybe I'm not aware of some of the things that are already done. And I was just wondering how is it possible to engage some other things, probably not really so much interesting, so much really good about academic papers.
I think some of the most influential academics published, then put out a media release, follow up with social media, but they've also used organisations like their Public Health Association to make sure that media interviews are organised with television, with talkback shows and so forth. And actually that's what builds up the momentum. And interestingly enough, it also makes people interested in their paper, and so other academics wind up citing their paper. So it actually has a snowball effect and has much more impact, not only with the general community, but also, interestingly, with the academic community. Am I right, David? Do you do academics?
I'm just going to quote a wise old sage who once said here, a certain Professor Martin McKee, if we do publicly funded research and fail to advocate our findings, why do we get out of bed in the morning?
May I add that I think that was one of the tweets that really went viral at this conference. So I think that there's a feeling that is growing, a consensus that is growing around this approach, that it's not enough. We owe it to society to do something about the research that we have and not just shy away from actively engaging out there.
Yeah, the gentleman first, please. Thanks.
Well, thank you for this talk. First of all, to Natasha, congratulations as President-elect. You're absolutely right in stating that we need to change the narrative. And electing a woman as President of the UFA is a really great start for the new change. So congratulations. So I am a member of the National Parliament in my country. Normally people don't want my phone number, but I'm happy to give it away. It's actually pretty easy to contact me anyway. Nowadays, nobody uses phones. You have all social media. But on migration, I'd like to say that I come from Portugal. In 1974, we had a major revolution, and all of our former colonies were given independence. And over 1 million refugees ran away from those colonies, and they all went to this small country called Portugal. 1 million people. And they integrated the country, and it was responsible for one of the major economic booms in Portugal's history. So I think that really puts everything into proportion. However, I'd like to challenge what was said here, that austerity led to extreme right movements around the world. I look at my country, where the communists are now in power. And it's also because of our history. Austerity leads to extremism, be it right or left. And the problem with extremism is that, in my opinion, is that people, when they take extreme positions, I'm a social democrat, so I'm boring center, right? When they take extreme positions, they always step forward. They always show their voice. They always go to vote. What worries me, actually, is those that are not stepping forward and they're not voting. The moderates. I mean, 50% of the people in most countries end up never voting. So I guess, after listening to this panel, it reminded me of what Martin Luther King said. And I think this goes to show that it's not just austerity. It's really the disconnect between politicians and the people that leads to extremist movements. I mean, George W. was elected after a major economic boom with the Clintons in office. So Martin Luther King said, "History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people." And I think UFA can really push for the good people of public health to step forward. Thank you.
One brief comment I agree about the good people. Let me say public health is also about governance. Had America had a preferential voting system, Donald Trump would not have even got started. And I think that we have to keep those sorts of things in mind. We have a responsibility to ensure good governance across our countries. It's interesting that in my country, in Australia, we have a 98% voter turnout. Why do we have a 98% voter turnout? Because you are required to go to the polling booth. There is a fine if you don't go to the polling booth. Nobody can force you to vote. You can rip up the paper and put it in there. But that's enough to make 98% of people go and vote. And perhaps that's a governance issue that other countries should begin to consider.
We're running out of time. One final question or comment. This was the lady in front here.
Hi. name is Lorna Benton. I'm coming from UCL in the UK. My question is on the theme of representation, which came up earlier, and I'm really motivated because I'm passionate about participatory research, and I'm really happy to see I'm not alone here at this conference. But we're talking about representation, and I wonder if there's something that we can do, something more, because our project, we work with community facilitators. Other people have community champions, but more and more we see community representatives involved in research. And as researchers, we're trained to really integrate them from every step of the research process until we reach conferences and beyond. And I think there's something we can do there. How can we improve representation just here in this discussion and in a bigger picture? How do we get community champions, or whatever we want to call them, involved in the bigger picture moving forward? Thank you.
These 10 steps are simply bare bones, and I think if anything's missing, I had a discussion earlier today with Jürgen, it is leadership or championship. It's not in there. For me, it's implied, but I think that every step and everything that we do, community participation, all heading within that broad concept of advocacy, making a difference, having voices heard, that's the critical issue.
I also can just add here, I'm not going into details because we don't have time, and yesterday we had a session on this, but the approach that I presented, the community monitoring and social accountability, is based explicitly on community participation, because all the studies are done by the communities, the analysis, and the advocacy afterwards are done explicitly by the communities. And this makes the communities active, willing to make the change, and believing in themselves that they can make the change.
And I don't think we have to be so shy. Migrant migration is such a sensitive and outspoken issue right now. So in my experience, if we open our mouth as researchers in migrant health, with a migrant health focus, or even with a broader migration focus, then the media are listening. They might abuse what you're saying, but at least they are listening, and you have a very good opportunity to spread your messages right now. There is sensitivity to the subject.
Okay, thank you. So I think after this plenary and after 4 days of very vivid and vibrant discussions, we definitely have a job to do. And I think my plea to all of you, before telling you that we would love obviously to continue these discussions and debates in Stockholm next year, is to go home and really find ways in which we can find within our own communities the right narrative to engage our local groups and citizens, because it is through them that we will put pressure on politicians and other decision makers, because it's not only the people who sit in parliament who have the power. There are other bodies also that need to be on board, engaged with us and able to influence. We need to find meaningful ways to put this pressure to get whole of society to address the commitments, or at least those commitments which in our countries, regions, communities are the most important, and to monitor their implementation over the coming months and years. So let's identify what is the most important priority area for our region, for our community, and let us work with NGOs, with citizens, in order to put pressure on our decision makers to really make improvements in population health that can be demonstrated through evidence, through data, and through personal stories. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was already your warm applause to the brilliant panelists. Thank you very much. That was the closing plenary. And once more, I want you to stay. Please don't leave. Only if you have to get your flight, because there is a closing ceremony.